What is going on, everybody? This is Mike from the last Corvette. It's been a while since I posted any videos on YouTube, but this is going to be part one of probably several parts on replacing my fuel pump in the C6. And there are several videos out there that are actually pretty good for do-it-yourselfers. You know, we got guys that replaced fuel pumps, drop tanks, and replaced fuel pumps in their garage, literally in parking lots. And so there's good information out there for sure. But I wanted to kind of go in depth in part one, and then as I progress, I actually go through the motions of dropping the tank and replacing the fuel pump. I'll obviously make videos and post them on YouTube and kind of compile everything, you know, into a pretty good spec for somebody in the future to reference. So let's start with this whole dual tank setup. It all started with the C5s. C5s converted over to saddle style fuel tanks. In a nutshell, you have two tanks, one on driver's side, one on the passenger side. With a crossover tube. Sometimes people call it a crossover pipe. Regardless of what you call it, it's a pipe that connects the two tanks together. It transfers fuel while you pump. It also transfers fuel into your fuel system, into your fuel rails, fuel lines, and then feeds the injectors. Basically, you got a feed and then a return as well that runs within the crossover. So C5s, when they came out and when they switched over to a dual style tank, obviously it was done for various reasons, you know, by people much smarter than me, for weight distribution, traction, stuff like that, to kind of balance out the vehicle. But they developed a leak. They developed issues pretty much right off the rip at the crossover tube. And it leaked fuel right where it connects, where you got a flange, twist on the flange, and connects to the tanks, either driver's side or passenger side. Now, when the C6 came out, and that's what I got, and I'm pretty sure if you are watching this video, you have a C6, but most of the stuff will apply to C5s. Very, very similar. So on the C6s, the first version was a LS2 60, a 6-liter. They fixed the crossover issue somewhat as far as the leak, but about 3 to 4 years into the run, the production run, the C6s started to develop fuel leaks. Okay, fuel leaks mainly on the driver's side, where the fuel tank is located and the fuel pump. On the setup, you actually have the main fuel pump located on the driver's side or inside the driver's side tank, and then your passenger side has a sending unit. So very similar body to what you have within the driver's side tank, but minus the fuel pump. So all the action is done on the driver's side. And, you know, really in a nutshell, half tank basically means your driver's side tank is full, and then your passenger side tank is empty. And as you fill the passenger side, the sending unit, the float comes up and kind of gives you the full or 3/4 or whatever else position. And then anything below half, you're sucking mainly from your driver's side tank. So the C6s came out, right? 2 to 4 years into the run, a lot of people started developing fuel leak issues, like I said before. 90% of all the issues went right back to the fuel pump itself. The whole mid-2000s wasn't the greatest era, honestly, for any of the manufacturers, OEM, non-OEM suppliers, cheap products. Engineering wasn't the best, obviously, basically right in the middle of the recession. Which, as we all know, was affected not only by the housing market, but also the automotive was completely just grenaded and ripped apart. So 90% was the fuel pump. Most of the issues were the elbow, 90-degree elbow coming out of the pump housing itself, where it connects to your braided line that kind of runs down the fuel tank and then into your fuel line, and then goes up into your engine compartment, feeds your fuel rail and your injectors around the intake manifold. So composite basically became brittle. Ethanol had a lot to do with it. It would develop cracks, and then under pressure, when the vehicle was running or priming, it would spray fuel, leak fuel on top of the tank, and then the fuel would basically trickle down the side of the tank and either onto the belly pan that holds the tank in place, leak through that, eventually make its way onto either a parking lot or your garage floor, which would create odor, fumes, right, vapors, and that's not the safest way to go about it. Another fail mode within that 90% was obviously the seal that is between your tank and the fuel pump. That's why it's important anytime you work on the fuel pump, you replace the seal. It's a separate part number, but it's important because the last thing you want to do is replace your fuel pump, go through all the motions, and then realize you still have a leak. Now, the last remaining 10% was basically split into fives, right, or into two. You had evap line issues, so some evap lines, same thing, would crack, come disconnected, and the other five was the actual tank issue itself, right? So imperfection from the supplier, leaks at the tank caused by an impact, right, like a car accident or something like that, or like I said, just a defective tank. So going back to doing yourself, it's been done both on automatic transmissions and manual transmissions. Obviously, a manual transmission is not as wide, so you have more room to stick your hands in there to try to disconnect the crossover tube, crossover pipe. And automatic is wider, takes up a little bit more room basically in between the main structure of the vehicle, so exhaust has to come off, and you know, but it's doable. It's definitely doable. It's been done before, and that's what I'm going to work with. Now, where the cost savings comes in is your normal price to troubleshoot and replace, let's say, a leaking fuel pump is right around $2,500 to $3,000 if you take it to a dealer. Maybe a little bit less if you take it to, let's say, a aftermarket shop. But the normal procedure at the dealer is they will drop your entire drive line as one unit. So your torque tube, your transmission, transfer case, your rear suspension will come right off, which is great. You have access to both tanks. You can see everything. Obviously, it's a lot easier to work on. But if you're in the garage, even if you have a quick lift or something like that, it's not possible unless you have either a full two-post or a drive up or even a half-post lift. Then you can work with it, but still you're adding on more labor, and it's labor intensive regardless. So I'll be taking the approach of leaving everything in place, taking my exhaust off, and basically going through the sequence of disconnecting the driver's side crossover tube, all the harnesses and everything else, and dropping the tank to not only fix the issue but also to upgrade. So when it comes to the upgrade, we're going to go back to the C6. When it first came out, LS260, in 08, they introduced the 6.2, which is the LS3. Both platforms utilize the same fuel pump. And obviously, as you guys know, LS3 was in the base and the Grand Sports, and the LS3 stayed in production until C7 came out. And we're not going to touch on C7, but even the C7, 14s through the 17s had fuel issues. Fuel pump issues, sending unit issues, and also vapor and leaks. So all that stuff wasn't really hammered out exactly, even 3 generations later. Okay, so If you currently go, and I always preach that you need to buy OEM, especially when it comes to fuel pumps and seals and gaskets. You will pay less, believe me, you will pay less than going through some kind of a, online store or any of that stuff. One of them is GM, I believe is GM Parts Outlet, but I will put it in the description. So you have three options, okay? Your three options are you can replace your LS2, LS3 fuel pump with the AC Delco fuel pump, or the whole assembly, right? So you can buy, it's about $120 difference. So you can just buy the fuel pump, or you can buy the whole fuel pump sending unit, everything as one. That's what I'll be purchasing. But you still have LS2, LS3 part number, and then you also have a LS7, which is your 06 model, as we know. And the difference there is, well, the horsepower, right? So the volume that the fuel pump can output. And LS2s, LS3s, your fuel system is rated to run out right around 500 horse before you need to either upgrade your internal fuel pump or go with a boost pump, right? We're not talking about injectors here. A lot of it comes from ethanol, right? If you switch over to ethanol, you kind of either running NA, or you're beyond NA and you got a supercharged or a turbocharged setup, and then you need to run ethanol, which uses about 30% more fuel. And on a stock injector, LS2 or LS3s, with a stock fuel pump, you'll be right at that limit where you're going to be on the verge of basically running out of fuel, as they call it. Now, with the LS7, Z06, the 7-liter, you are possibly, give or take, 10-20%, you can be pushing up to 600 plus horsepower before the same thing happens. And once again, running out of fuel is, fixed by either internal fuel pump upgrade or a booster pump. Now, ZR1s is a whole different animal. When ZR1 came out, obviously it's supercharged from GM. That pump won't plug and play. The 06 pump will plug and play completely with all the fuel lines, connectors, your OEM regulator, fuel pressure regulator, that is. ZR1 won't. Connectors won't be the same. Obviously, your fuel feeds in and out won't be the same, so not even worth retrofitting. If you're in a position, and I always preach this, if you actually are building a high horsepower vehicle that needs a lot of fuel, you're better off just dropping in a internal fuel pump, high performance fuel pump. Now, fuel pumps. Now, in those you have couple of different companies, three different options. So when you go into a high performance internal fuel pump, you will have to run a external fuel pressure regulator, because now everything that you have in the vehicle won't be able to handle the output. You will also have to run a external return line. You guys see that in pictures and videos where same thing with a boost, like a booster pump, where you tap into your fuel tank. Okay, everything is nice, and most of the time it works great, but anytime you run external pumps or regulators, you also have a chance of leaks, which, if it's on near a electrical item or a hot part, could potentially cause leaks and a fire, which is the worst case scenario. But as long as you go with high dollar setups and follow all the instructions and all the procedures, you'll be just fine. So that is kind of like your third option. Now, for me, I'm going to build heads cam. I am going to put a flex fuel sensor on. I already have all that stuff. It's going to be a trick flow setup, and I will put a flex fuel sensor on to get myself ready for the next stage, will be a supercharger. And on top of that, I will replace my, basically my crank pulley or the dampener, as they call it, and I will pin it. That way I don't have to pull my steering rack out twice. When you do a cam, you got to pull it out, and then obviously when you pin, you got to pull it out, or you have to remove, basically, or I should say undo the engine mounts and raise everything. It's a pain in the ass. So I'm going to do everything right, but the flex fuel will gain me 10 to 15 horsepower on LS. LTC a little bit more, up to 20 plus horsepower, switching to ethanol. But that will give me room for bigger injectors, running 30% more fuel by switching to a Z06 pump. And that's what I'll be putting into my tank, regardless if it's the seal leaking or if it's the actual fuel pump sending unit elbow that's producing the vapors that I'm seeing and smelling around the vehicle. That's really it. So I'll have everything built. I'll be able to run both. And you know, Z06 pump, if you pull up the AC Delco part number, you'll see that under the Z06 part number fuel pump, which is just off by the last digit is a 1 instead of a 0, you'll see that under the Z06 you will see 60, 62, and 7 liter. So it's a super seat pump, and some people say that it runs louder than a normal pump, but let me be honest with you. If you're building up your vehicle, you have exhaust on it, you'll be able to tell the difference unless you literally just stand next to the driver's side quarter panel and you listen for the hum. And I've been around Z06s, I don't see it. Maybe if you prime it with just the accessory on, you'll hear a difference or something without the engine running, but my car is pretty loud as is, and I'm not worried about that. I'm worried about that headroom in building up the vehicle. So of course, when I switch over to a supercharger, I will be putting a booster, a setup, but 06 pump for now will work just fine. I'm not trying to be wild. I'm trying to be more of a mild setup, and it should work out good. So hopefully that covers kind of all of the options and all of the cases as far as the fail modes and fixes for it. This is part 1, like I said. Hopefully in a couple of weeks, I'll be actually getting into the meat and potatoes. I was gonna start on heads and cam. I'm gonna start when the weather is still decent with the tank itself. I'm gonna disconnect and drop it, and like I said, I'm gonna walk you guys through and try to create this into one bundle of joy where anybody can go through and say, okay, these are my options, this is what I can upgrade, and that's how it's done. In my case, it's an automatic, so it's gonna be painful, a lot of cuss words, but I'll take you guys through the journey, and we'll go from there. Talk to you guys later.